My skills with managing freelance talent actually got exponentially better during COVID because basically everybody was a freelancer at that point, right? I actually started my job in-house for Insomnia Cookies the week before the whole pandemic shut down. So I never even got to meet my team in real life for about a year and a half, which was pretty crazy.
Well, let's start with the easy stuff. What is it about your job that you love when it comes to managing creative work?
I've always loved the idea, right? The initial idea. The execution's fun too, but to me the real fun part is concepting that initial idea. And as creative director, now I can kind of give a starting place, that initial idea to the team and let them kind of push the pixels, write the copy, and then just guide them in my vision. It's nice to have it. I mean, obviously I still have executive directors, but it's nice for it to be, my full vision and the way I see it from art to copy.
Awesome. Yeah, and when it comes to bigger brand projects, because I know you've worked on like a ton of different brands, obviously you have production crews, you have freelancers, you have internal and external resources alike. What are some challenges that you've seen along the way when it comes to managing external talent?
Just the distance. So my skills with managing freelance talent actually got exponentially better during COVID because you basically everybody was a freelancer at that point, right? So I actually started my job in-house for Insomnia Cookies the week before the whole pandemic shut down. So I never even got to meet my team in real life for about a year and a half, which was pretty crazy.
Oh,
So
wow.
basically at that point I am managing freelancers. So I had a team then, and then we would also work with freelance vendors and whatnot. But over that 2 year span, now I feel like I can come into any position now that we're back in the real world and manage from a distance, which was unbelievably hard at the time to do.
Yeah, we've heard that a lot with just the different time zones and even just collaborating creatively from afar. What are some actionable ways to do that? Like how did you find solutions to bridge that distance gap?
So a few different ways. Obviously, the old school way is email. That's what obviously everybody does. But I was never into project management tools until again I went in house and Insomnia Cookies. Everything was a little bit different, and we started using Asana, which was really great. I've always been one of those kind of people that when I give feedback, I love to be in the office. I love to be able to walk down the hall or bring you in. You walk me through it in person. We workshop it live. But obviously, with video, you can't do that. So these project management tools really helped and just really staying constantly in communication on Slack, starting Slack channels outside of the company. I didn't even know you could do that, but now I know you can actually have cross company Slack channels or just, with your freelance vendor or whatever it might be. But I think the key is to really stay in constant communication. I've also learned, to your point about time zones and everything, that never even crossed my mind of thinking about like when a meeting would be. And I'm actually missed so many meetings or I was late to them or I was early to them. And I'm like, where are you? So now I have this paranoia where when I'm setting up meetings, even if I know where the vendor's at, it's just habit now to write EST or check in with them and see what their time zone is. But that's definitely a key piece of information that now, I do all the time as habit.
How do you brief out creative work to make sure that people are, working within the vision that you mentioned? Has
Mhm.
that changed?
Not really. My go-to is usually I like putting together a Google Slides deck. It's almost templated at this point. Mood board, color palette, reference imagery, and then I'll even start throwing, even if it's like a TV spot, I'll just start writing headlines in there, right? Just to kind of get that tone of voice that's in my head for as part of that mood board. So it's almost like a 5 to 6 page deck that is one big mood board of where my direction is heading. And then I followed up with like white paper ideas of just initial thought starters of nuggets of information or ideas that can be to to see if you could explore to see if they have legs and where they go. So I like giving a starting point, but I also encourage them to obviously add their own ideas in. And I've found that I've gotten pretty good over the years of of taking that idea, their nugget, whatever they come up with, and finding that kind of diamond in the rough in it, and then polishing that up and bringing that to life. I don't think any idea is a bad idea. I think there's always something interesting in there, and you just have to dig it out.
Nice. I'd love to learn more about that with, especially when it comes to external talent and, designers. Like how do you pull those nuggets of insight out of an idea that you think has legs? How do you kind of nurture that along, especially from afar?
That's kind of an intangible. It's almost like a gut feeling, like this idea might not be right, but I think we could take it this way. Here's kind of how I see it. And then they're like, oh yeah, it's interesting. And then they start building upon that. But yeah, it's really like there's no rhyme or reason to it. I just feel like, oh, there's something really interesting here. And I'm a big analytics and data guy too. I love thinking about the insights as well. I think if they come up with an idea that there is some sort of human truth or insight. And that's what I kind of latch on to. If fluff ideas, you can squeak one through here and there, but I find the best ideas, the ones that have legs and can go far, are the ones with those truths built into them.
Yeah, I love that. Switching gears a little bit when it comes to working with new talent, let's say, because obviously you have a big brand client, there's some specific standards and guidelines. How do you onboard new talent into a project and make sure that they're across everything that they need to be across and, clearly understanding what needs to be done?
Well, starting with brand guidelines is a good place, and it even outside of the brand guidelines, it's like, what does this brand stand for? I think brands are way more extensive now than they used to be in the sense of they're almost lifestyles now. And yeah, while you have your color palettes and tone of voice and everything, the successful ones are really more of a vibe, more of a lifestyle, and trying to get that lifestyle and vibe and, general direction of the company and what they stand for and what the product means to consumers, I think is the most important. Obviously, you can walk anybody through a brand guide and show them, oh, Sheets has red and yellow as their colors, but like what they really stand for is their people, what they call their Sheets freaks, and it's a whole lifestyle. You come in there, you get your gas, but you also get your food and any other things you're picking up along your road trip. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm curious about some of the intangible nuances because I know like a lot of this is sort of, you feel it in your gut, but like I find when it comes to matching talent, like the right talent to a project, for example, there's
Mhm.
something that goes on in our heads that it's hard to explain, but I'm wondering if you could try to explain it a little bit of like, oh, like you just know in your gut that, oh, this person would be great for this particular thing because you have like a Rolodex of people, right?
Yep.
What goes through your mind on like, oh, I think this person has the potential to really crush it on this one.
Yeah, I think this is going to sound very basic, but just their style. And, if you're a photographer, you have a specific post-production treatment, you have a certain way that you shoot people, what angles, what their lighting looks like. If it's a designer, if I have a brand that's fresh and modern, like uber modern and minimalist, then, I'll go through my Rolodex of that specific type of designer. Same thing with copywriters. If it's a brand like on the Sheets, for example, again, we have our more comedic writers, right? But I've also farmed out like a 2,000 page guide for processes. I think it was an SOP, I think, where I went right to my technical writer who I knew I would never let around my headlines or TV spots, but damn, can they write some great technical copy and love it too.
Nice. This is switching gears a little bit, but so you and I met way back when we were working on some Philly ad club and like some agency stuff, and even I think you were doing some freelance design at the time, and you were doing some logos and brand work. But as someone who has also freelanced and been on the agency side and now been on the enterprise brand side, what what advice would you give to resource managers or other creative directors or anybody who's like managing creative freelancers in terms of just how to get the best out of their talent?
again, going back to that constant communication, I think the more check-ins, the better. I don't want to call it hand holding, but I'm kind of a hand holder. I don't believe in wasting people's time, especially when it comes down to paying freelance hours. So I like to stay pretty involved in the process and just not have them run down paths that I just don't think are going to work. Because I think it's crucial to really manage those small amount of freelance hours that you have because budgets, are getting slashed year after year and you have less hours to use. So you really have to be smart with them and you really have to consider, if it's a larger scale project, you have to consider if I already know I need a full day of photography, right? Does that eat into my design hours? Does it eat into my copywriting hours? So kind of thinking through the scope of each of those segments before the project even starts is super helpful because you don't want to spend all your hours on one facet of the project and have nothing left for your designers because then you're going to do it yourself. I've been there.
Yeah, I mean, this is gold. So how do you control that scope creep? And you'd mentioned like budgeting and making sure people don't go down the wrong path creatively, especially when it comes to freelance hours within a limited budget. How do you control that and make sure that you don't have that rogue spend, as they say?
Yeah, I think that comes to that pre-planning, thinking about siloing your hours, and then staying in constant communication with them, constant check-ins, and it, it's kind of, like case by case. It's hard to really give like one specific answer.
Is there an example that comes to mind where you've like things were kind of going rogue with freelance hours and you had to, approach that and figure out how to reallocate things?
Yeah, a good project recently was I worked with a freelance photographer and production company producer on some social media spots with Justin Jefferson for Insomnia Cookies. And the budget was already very, very low to begin with. And it just kept creeping up and creeping up and creeping up. So what we did is kind of put the creative concepting and planning on pause at the beginning. And we said, all right, so this is heading in a direction that is going to be very expensive. Just with my background in production, I could start seeing like the dollar signs flashing with, what the background of the set's going to look like, the location and everything. So I'm like, let's pause this. Let's all meet up as a team. So me, the photographer, and the producer came together and said, all right, let's figure out a way to cut the location. And let's figure out a way to cut the props and cut the wardrobe and do something really creative. And it ended up actually benefiting the project exponentially because we had to be really creative on chopping a lot of that out. But we came up with this really great idea of almost placing him watching TV in this void. Think of like Stranger Things, that dark void. So we really found this like dark studio that we had just two lights in. We didn't have to get all the exponential lights. We had some mood lighting set up around. And then we just added a little touch of atmosphere in post. And, the end product ended up being way cooler than I think it would have been if it was just in, what we would consider his house or whatever. So it added this layer of creativity and unexpectedness to the project.
That's cool. I guess it's true what they say then about like the creative limitations that lead to, better ideas.
Yep. Yeah, it really forces you to think creatively. Sometimes you get caught up in muscle memory and going back to the stuff that you know or you've seen, but when you actually have to stop and think like, hey, how do we do this within a certain budget? You start getting really creative and diving into the depths of your brain that you didn't really know you had.
That's awesome. Another project that I remember you worked on that I'd love to hear about if you're willing to share is that Super Bowl spot with Craig Robinson.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I imagine it's crazy, but with like internal, external talent, probably different vendors. There's a very strict timeline and the budget's probably pretty crazy. Like, can you share more about that experience in terms of managing all the creative resources?
Yeah, so it's funny. I don't know how to answer this one because we actually got managed by the production company, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is we actually reached out to Neil Brennan, who I don't know if you know is Dave Chappelle's writer partner.
Yeah.
He started getting in directing at the time. I think he had done a couple other smaller spots, but super talented, super funny. But he really kind of led the charge on a lot of the decisions. We brought the idea, obviously, of the product, which we had worked on internally at the agency, wrote the concept, the scripts and everything, but he was very influential on, tweaking the scripts to add extra layers of comedic value and, how the shots should be laid out and the location that it should be at and really brought like just another level to the spot. He did a really great job with it. And but again, that was a team effort, but he definitely elevated the project.
Was there anything unexpected that happened along the way that you guys had to solve for?
Craig Robinson was a little late, but that's like every celebrity that does these things. Oh, the other one was, yes, there was. So Craig did the spot with his brother. That wasn't our original intention, and it was kind of like a really big surprise. His brother had never done any acting, but I think, at least that I know of, but I think he was trying to get into it, and he's like, if you want me, you were using my brother. But it ended up working out great. They had great chemistry, and I just liked that layer of it being his brother versus just some random friend. And it just brought some authenticity to it that was really interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, that I saw him in concert with his band on the side. He's really funny.
He's so talented, man. He even he riffed this whole keyboard song about hoagies. We gave him kind of like a starting point, but he almost like ad-libbed some of it, and it was hilarious. He's super, super talented, super funny guy.
That's awesome. Well, probably just one other question that I'm asking everybody. There's a lot of hot takes around like the future is freelance and,
Yeah.
how the future of contingent work is growing and just how many people are becoming independent contractors, especially in America. So I'm just curious, like,
Yeah.
what's your take on the future of the creative workforce?
It's definitely a generational shift, and I think it's going to be a massive divide in certain generations with other generations, and also the collaboration of bridging that divide. I think is going to be interesting is one word for it. I'm a big collaborator. We talked about, I like doing everything in person. I like being around the team. It brings energy. It brings ideas. Some of our best TV spots, like when that Craig Robinson thing, the Dietz Nuts thing, that was at 1 a.m. over a beer with some buddies. We were just sitting in our office and talking about it, and it ended up becoming a new product, the Super Bowl spot, and we got to work with Craig Robinson. That's my take. I totally see where the whole freelance thing comes from, but I think what it comes down to is it adds an extra stressor to creative directors and brands, because now managing is not just managing the creative, it's managing people. And I'm not saying all creative directors are terrible at it, but they like managing the creative and not the people. And it's really hard to do that from afar, and it's really hard to collaborate from afar and give direction. And then you just miss that energy and that connection with other humans. Make it a point to really stay connected with your team, even if you're not there. And don't make everything impersonal with emails and Slacks. You can rely on tech like Zooms and all of that, but like you need to see that person, look them in the eye, have conversations, whether they're hard or fun or whatever it might be. But make sure that you never lose that human touch, because that's where at least a lot of my creativity comes from. I feed off the energy and the ideas of other people, and I think it really only benefits the work.